Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the Tories' latest legislative atrocity, the Economic Activity of Public Bodies Bill, which aims to stop public bodies from refusing to boycott foreign businesses and states on the grounds of human rights abuses. But the bill itself may be a sign that the Tories are preparing for opposition. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, going back to 2019, I read the Conservative Party manifesto and I said on this channel, this is more than just about Brexit. It contained passages which spoke of a government wanting to strip us of our rights and dignity on a grand scale. It was horrifying. You know, I closed my thoughts back then 3.5 years ago by painting a picture of a British government becoming increasingly autocratic, and I said people were being too complacent about it, thinking, oh, it couldn't happen here. Yeah, but it happened there, and it happened there, and it happened there. Yeah, but it won't happen here. And people are still being complacent about it. We've seen it. We've seen our rights being reduced, and we shudder to think what more could be coming. And people are still engaging in political cakeism. I mean, how many times do I read someone raging at the latest Tory freedoms and rights grab? And this will be one of them again, only to see them add an additional thought that actually we shouldn't replace the government after all, because reasons. Oh, well, the other lot are just as bad. Behave. I actually wonder just how badly we have to feel these loss of freedoms biting before we take them seriously, because maybe that's the problem. Maybe people look at the rights we've lost and they don't see it as their rights. They're seeing it as others, so they're only outraged just because of the principle. They're outraged at principle, but they haven't felt those freedoms being lost themselves. Maybe that's what's needed. But this latest one is quite interesting because it doesn't actually remove rights as such from people in the UK, as far as I can tell. There is an indirect lack of right because it does attack free speech. The Economic Activity of Public Bodies Overseas Matters Bill. It changes the way public bodies can choose to boycott foreign states with procurement. For example, let's say you need to procure some goods or services, and maybe the best value for public money means buying from a country whose human rights abuses are particularly grotesque at the time, or at least to you, whether it be a local council or whether it be like the Welsh government. So that public body, whoever it happens to be, decides to boycott them. So they narrow the range of available places they can get that procurement from, to ones where they feel, we wouldn't be funding human rights abuses by spending it there. This legislation would stop that. Only you have to wonder if this legislation can even pass in its intended form. George Perrotts, KC, who is an expert in public law, has pointed out some quite interesting things. So first of all, this legislation would extend to devolved bodies, like, as I say, the Scottish and Welsh governments and parliaments. So expect trouble ahead. Given some other things Perrotts points out, I actually wonder if this bill isn't designed to stoke divisions between the various legislative bodies around the country. A second point made, in no particular order by the way, a second point made is that the legislation would actually force elected politicians to tell lies. Now, it's not Boris Johnson who came up with it. So Perrotts gives an example. He gives the example of a campaigner for Uyghur rights asking a councillor why they are procuring goods from China, and the councillor admits that they would rather not. That I agree with you. I would, if it were up to me, I would absolutely boycott them, but the law is tying my hands. I'm not allowed to boycott them. Well, they're breaking the law by even saying that. Because and this is the attack on free speech as well. It's not enough to stop that council, say, from boycotting China or any other state accused of human rights abuses. The legislation as currently written prohibits you from saying that you would act differently if the law were different. You're literally not allowed to say, well, I'm acting this way because the law tells me. Is there any other law where that is the case? Is there any other law in existence where actually saying that you're only doing this thing because of the law is itself breaking the law? So, in other words, if that councillor was asked that question, by law they would be forced to lie. Or refuse to answer the question, I suppose. It is as clear an attack on free speech as you can imagine. Parents themselves argue this might well be in breach of Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. But then there's a third point, and this is where it gets really interesting. Peretz makes an incredibly interesting observation. He points to the Tories preparing for opposition here. So the bill prohibits public bodies from excluding procurement from certain states because of an objection on political or moral grounds, right? That's certainly part of the purpose of this bill. But the bill allows the government to make exceptions. So, for example, you would think Russia would be on the list of exceptions right now. So it's not saying that you're not allowed to exclude any country because of human rights abuses or whatever. What it's saying is you're not allowed to exclude any country that the government hasn't put on a list. So the government can sort of make a list and say, look, you are allowed to boycott these countries because, you know, we think they're also bellends. But there are exceptions. The specific exceptions are instructive. There are 3 exceptions in this bill: Israel, the occupied Palestinian territories, and the occupied Golan Heights. Now, isn't that interesting? The Tories are saying in this bill that the government can decide that certain states, which UK public bodies should be allowed to boycott. So in other words, the public bodies themselves, anyone outside of Westminster, is not allowed to unilaterally boycott any state based on human rights abuses, right? But the government in Westminster can decide to do that and allow others to do so as well. However, they are not allowed to put Israel or any of its legally seized territories on the list. Now, what possible reason could the Tories have for tying the hands of the government and with respect to these specific territories? And it is because they don't see it as tying their hands, but that of a Labour government. They think it will be particularly thorny for a Labour government that they can allow councils or devolved parliaments to boycott any part of the world, but not Israel or its land grabs. Now, if that isn't a sign that the Tories are actively thinking about laying the groundwork for Labour being in power imminently, I do not know what is. In reality, of course, I hardly think it's much of a gotcha. Peretz himself describes it as a crude device, and it is. I know I've said Labour can't just repeal everything the Tories put in place. It would take far too much time, and that's absolutely true. But I would make the following points here. First of all, if there is nothing of value in this entire bill, I don't know. But if there is absolutely nothing in this entire bill that Labour would be approving of, they can just repeal the whole thing. Second, if there is something of value, and there often is something in there, then amending this one would be really easy. It wouldn't mean going through amending loads of bits and changing the wording of it. It wouldn't mean changing any wording. You just scrub out 6 lines in its entirety. Done. Finished. Third, in terms of what Labour could do with this, that could be informed by how much trouble it's causing. So let's say it is causing trouble for a Labour government. Well, they'll just deal with it sooner rather than later. Of all the crap the Tories are going to leave Labour to deal with, this one's the equivalent of a stink bomb. I hardly think this will be more than a minor irritation. It's almost childish. But I just find it interesting that it is clearly written in such a way as to suggest they need to salt the earth for a future Labour government. It does make you wonder if it says anything about what the Cabinet are thinking in terms of timing. Because as I keep saying, if they want to leave Labour with the biggest mess to clear up, then they go to the polls early rather than later, this autumn really. But then I don't think they have time to get this passed before autumn. We're only a few weeks away from the summer recess, like 4 weeks away, Parliament goes on recess. So unless, and there's not going to be much time when they come back because they will go into conference season. So unless they really put their shoulders behind it, and the House of Lords are likely to point out the odd little flaw with this bill. So if it is intended to cause problems for Labour in government, it looks more like a part of a plan to go for an election next year rather than this. So it would suggest to me that probably they're not planning on an autumn election at the moment. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships, and until next time, I'll see you later.